This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. For this episode of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast, we are sitting on the brew deck itself here in on the outskirts of Burlington, Vermont. And I'm sitting here with Bill Cherry, founder of Switchback Brewing. Welcome to the podcast, Bill.
Thank you.
Switchback, I should say founder, but also unabashed smoke beer fanatic who has been pushing a smoke beer program here at Switchback for years now.
Yep, it's a labor of love.
Absolutely. And those beers have come our way. You've sent those beers out there for competitions. Your grodziskie, Katie's Love Poem, over the last 2 years has nabbed medals, gold and a bronze medal. Really, two years back to back. It was that Great American Beer Festival or World Beer Cup?
World Beer Cup.
World Beer Cup, right there.
Yeah.
And so there you go. You've built some consistency now, even here in the smoke beer program, and are just crushing it year after year. That was actually the historical beer category that you won in, I believe.
It was. Yeah. It was. I entered it the second year internally. To me, it was a challenge to the judges. I wanted to see how consistent they would be.
Yeah.
and they proved themselves, as far as I'm concerned. They liked it both years.
Well, you all have also been sending them to us for the last couple of years to put it on our radar. And so as I was setting up this trip to Vermont, naturally I was thinking about, how to build some balance and who we're talking to, and like the opportunity to talk to smoked beer fanatics here at Switchback. It was pretty attractive. And so here we are sitting on the brew deck itself, and we are going to talk about the range of smoked beer. Obviously, we've got the grodziskie in glasses right now, but you really run the gamut here from Bamberg style Oktoberfest, Rauch beer. You've got smoked Saison. You have Chipotle smoked Imperial Stout, smoked IPA. I mean, the amount of smoked beer that you have, even just right now in the cooler, is pretty expansive. I can't say that I've seen that much smoked beer anywhere outside of Live Oak in Texas, another one of my absolute favorite brewers who are just as equally passionate about smoked beer. So anyway, over the course of this episode, we're going to talk about smoked beer in all of its forms unapologetically. And we're just going to go deep on that. Before we do that, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer. But don't take it from me.
Hey, this is Josh Erickson of Chafuncta Brewing in Mandeville, Louisiana. The team at G&D were a critical part of our 10X expansion, always just a phone call or email away. And thanks to their superior equipment, technology, and documentation, commissioning our new chiller was smooth and straightforward. Now we can't wait until we need to upgrade our existing chiller.
That's right. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And ProBrew is the industry partner that brewers trust to take their operations to the next level, especially when it comes to canning their product for distribution. By partnering with ProBrew, brewers can fill and seam their canned product. It ranges from 100 to 600 cans per minute. Their unique filling process also ensures low DO pickup and focuses on product quality during the entire process. For more information, visit probrew.com or email them at contactus@probrew.com. ProBrew, brew your beer. Also, are you struggling to source affordable citrus ingredients due to market fluctuations? Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends, which mimic straight concentrates at a better price point and with a more reliable supply. Old Orchard's citrus flavored blends include blood orange, grapefruit, lemonade, lime, and tangerine. To learn more and request your free samples, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. It's a true pleasure that our audience are all brewing nerds and will go there with us as we spend an hour talking about smoked beer. But Bill, why don't you give us the Switchback story? Tell us the story of Switchback and tell us, give us your story, your journey through beer that led you to found Switchback. And then retrace those steps for us.
You're going to expose my age here, but I grew up.
You're not that much older than I am.
I started off in Ohio at the time, I don't believe we had a single craft brewery there. That's how long ago it was.
Sure.
And decided I wanted to work in the brewing industry, but I totally anticipated that would mean, making Bud Miller Coors.
Sure.
And got a degree in microbiology and put my application in, and they were not interested. and so I ended up making bologna in a bologna factory, making sure that it didn't kill people.
Yeah.
And every year I would send resumes off to all the big breweries and looking for something. And it is actually, this is kind of a fun story, is after like 4 years of this, I realized that I was asking the wrong people for a job. And I sent personal letters off to the heads of the departments at the big brewers, at Bud and Coors, and knowing that, not asking them for a job, just asking them for advice. And in particular, the head of R&D for Coors wrote me back a personal letter. He gave me, from the Coors library, books to start studying, front copy or the title pages so I could look them up and find them, and a list of all the great brewing schools in the world. And said, go get yourself an education. And I took his letter and got in a U-Haul truck and drove out to Davis, California, and got into brewing school. So yeah. And so when I was there, it was I got a master's degree in brewing, and this was
they were just funneling talent out of certain brewing programs where that was your step in, right?
That was my step in, and was hanging out at the Master Brewers Association meetings with the early folks of Sierra Nevada and
Sure.
Anchor and Mendocino and stuff like that. Those folks, and that's where, for me, because of where I'd come from, the first time I realized I could maybe work for a small company. And it was really interesting that I rolled in anticipating I'd just be a big corporate brewer, and left the program going, no, I'm going to get into this, and landed a job with Boulevard Brewing in Kansas City, and was their head brewer for 5 years. I gave them the curse that's known as unfiltered wheat, which became their
curse. That's a pretty large brand for them these days.
That's about as big as you get, yeah. And that was a fun thing, in that we made a wheat beer
Well,
out of.
We shouldn't claim giving them tank set. That's Powell's beer. But
that's Powell's beer. But yeah, it literally was my brewers. We were talking about it, and our second our second beer for sales volume was a wheat beer, but it was made out of locally grown wheat. John McDonald always had that feel, even back then, of he's like, we've got wheat growing in fields right next to us, and I want that. And so we developed a recipe so we could just take straight seed wheat, but we thought of it as a pretty pallid beer. And my brewer said, if you drink it straight from the tank, it's got a lot of character. And I went and did it, and then just went to John and said, we're craft brewers. And so this is 1994 or 5. We're craft brewers. We're bringing the consumer something they've never seen before. We're kind of the harbingers of, this is what beer could be.
Right.
If we think it's better this way, shouldn't we give it to them this way? And we debated for like months whether the public would accept this cloudy, weird looking beer. And finally pulled the trigger, went out, and it's just such a great story. We asked our salespeople came back and said, what are people saying? And like, yeah, we talked to some bartenders. They put it in front of people and they go, what the hell is this? And we go, it's unfiltered. It's supposed to be that way. And they shrug their shoulders and start drinking it. And so all of our worry went away, and then it just took off like a rocket. And but kind of as brewers, we were fond of our pale ale. And so it was a little bit of but our pale ale is all the hoppy wonder and stuff. And
it's so funny because, you all dealt with that in the 90s
Yeah.
And then of course in the 20 teens, it all came back again and now, the same issue with hazy IPA, and brewers had the same kind of question. So anyway, it's just cyclical. Like time continues to echo itself.
So you can so there's a great lineage here for me that you can feel is that great success with that unfiltered beer, and I'll kind of yada yada to I'm in Vermont, and I'm working at a food company, and because I wanted to be up here in Vermont, and that venture failed, and so the business plan for Switchback starts, and amazingly enough, guess who's never made a filtered beer at their brewery? We don't own one. Never have.
Huh.
And that was always that part of, and for me, it's kind of like saying, kind of going along with that story of.
Wait, there's no filter in this brewery?
We do not own one.
You've got 200-ish barrel tanks here or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
all right. That's
it's
you've planted
bold.
your flag.
That's right.
You're committed.
And I look at it, and we actually follow the Boulevard method for carbonating our beer. So all our tanks are pressure rated so that they get 100% carbonated just from the yeast.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And so my concept is kind of to say, as a brewer, my beer is probably never better than if you can just pull it right off the Zwickel off the side of the tank. My what would you say? My vision was I'm going to try to bring that to the public as close as I can. So I'm going to do as little touching around and playing with it as possible, and just get it from the aging tank into a keg or into a bottle with as little disruption as possible to kind of deliver that.
Low intervention wineries, eat your hearts out. Like, no, it's a noble, focus and process.
And it's, it's easier now that there's all the hazy IPAs and stuff. In the early days, I did a lot of running around to explain to bars and stuff why it was okay. The beer was actually okay if it sometimes poured extra cloudy because they bumped the keg and roused the yeast on the bottom a bit, and they got used to it, and here we are. So,
in the same time, I imagine things like Allagash White are also like pushing this, hey, like there are multiple things that started, kind of catching on, and people got a little more comfortable with all of that.
And it really was. In the early days, it was the cloudiness ended up becoming kind of a badge of, and people started to associate that with, we really like this beer. It must be because it's cloudy. and so now I think that's carried on and on of everybody kind of anticipating that as being, a little less processed, a little more interesting.
And here we are now where hazy, cloudy, turbid it's just the norm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
and, partially as a result of Vermont, the state of Vermont, and its IPA exports.
Sometimes it's a curse. Sometimes seasonally, our beer will naturally clarify a little more than normal. And this was quite a few years ago, but we had some times where folks were like, they've started filtering. I literally had to run around to accounts, and I'd shake the keg up and show them, because they're like, you've sold out.
Sure. So when you got Switchback going, what was the beer goal? You had to have some key beers in mind. What did you want to make that to share with the world here?
So when I had my little period where I wasn't brewing, I would get comments from my business partner. He was an old friend, and he's like, you should open up a brewery and we should do one. And I'd say, what are we going to make? Everybody's, this is still the 90s. And it's like, everybody has like a dark beer, either a stout or porter. They've got some type of something along the lines of a pale ale. Some type, either golden or wheat beer. They got these little families. I go, what are we going to add? What are we going to do that adds to the beer culture? And I would kind of stop there, but I don't know if anyone else has this happen, but you have a job and you just hate it some days. and I'd be driving home from work going, this job sucks. And I go, maybe we should try open up this brewery. I just didn't want to be a business owner more than anything. And maybe we should try doing this. I go, but what would I make? What beer would I make? And I would think about it a little bit, and then I'd table it. for months.
Right.
And then I'd have another one of those days and go, what am I going to make? And over the course of that time, literally a couple of years, I started to come up with this flavor profile that we use for our flagship Switchback ale, and that I felt was fitting a niche that wasn't there. I had been to so many brew pubs that we'd go on these nice tours, and they're doing all these really cool beers and stuff, and then there'd be this one beer on the side that they say, that's for like the Bud Light drinkers that come into our restaurant. We need to give them something. And everybody at the end of the tour, someone would say, so what do you sell the most of? And they'd point to, yeah, that one that I didn't even want to talk about. And I was like, yeah, I think there's some middle ground here. And I think we're doing things that we really love. They're really intense. And then we do almost a throwaway beer of something that's really light just for those folks. But is there something in between here? And that's what ale was conceived of, which is it's got tons of complexity, but it's subtle. It's much more subtle and balanced. And that was my mantra, was if you get the balance right, it's going to drink really, really smooth. And it worked. And so and it's one of those things that hit the market. It is not a style. We can't enter it into like a contest.
Sure.
It violates. I've looked. There's not a single style guideline that it doesn't violate something. And I had literally just thinking about, so it's a flavor idea, and then I just kind of built the beer around it. And I borrowed stuff from everyone. And so there's some stuff that the Belgians do that I'm like, why do we only do that in Belgian beers? That could taste good.
Like what?
Well, I can't tell you.
Oh, all right. You'll spill the beans on Smoke's beer, but you can't tell me about Switchback ale.
Yeah, that's still our moneymaker. So, but
Okay.
But there'd be all these little things, and I see, and one probably good thing is I cannot remember what beer it was, but it was a West Coast beer that was really popular at the time, and I just thought it was terrible. And I was like, why do people like this so much? And I actually said, I think they're attracted to this one part, and I put it into my beer. I said, I'm going to take that because I think people do like that, but I'm going to, not have that horribleness that I think is in this beer.
Interesting.
And I'm almost upset with myself. I don't remember what beer it was anymore. But so I did all of these things because I was scared to death that we were going to go out of business. And when we opened, this is a great statistic for everybody. We opened in 2002, and I think the BA or someone sent out a little notice about several years later, and they're showing in 2002, 30 new breweries open, 30 for the year. And we were one of them. 22 breweries closed for a net gain in the whole U.S. of 8. Our first 5 years of business, that positive number for the whole country was never higher than 13.
Wow.
Nobody thought this was a good idea.
In the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great perspective, as the sky appears to be falling for a number of brewers right now, to realize that it has been this way before.
Yeah.
This is not really that new in the world of brewing, and it's actually more normal to see it like this than it is to see a net positive of 900 or 600 breweries opening in a year.
Yeah, it's insane to think that it got that far. When I think about talking to the bank for some money the first time, and,
sure,
and they literally, I believe the article that ran in the newspaper announcing that we were opening, I believe the headline was something like, "Can Vermont handle another brewery?" Because we had like 5.
Sure. It feels so quaint now. I remember even in 2012, 2013, all of that discussion, like has craft beer peaked? Like there's 1,800 or 2,000 breweries in the country. Like, yeah, okay. Like how naive do we all seem now looking back at that kind of moment? But sure. I was never a supply side economic fan until I really dove into, deep into looking at the business side of craft beer and realized that there is something to be said for if you build it, they will come. And the audience that breweries have built for craft beer is very, very significant. It wasn't as if this audience was just out there and there was an untapped need. It was a need the breweries created because they showed, and through repetition and through presence over years and years and years, that this was something that people should pay attention to. And then they started to. It's gradual, but it's not like it just suddenly there was this existing void that, that everybody just marched into. The breweries created the audience.
Absolutely. That was, I remember talking with one of the owners of Breckenridge Brewing, and they came into Kansas City and they were really jealous of Boulevard because like, you don't have any competition. We're here in Colorado with all these competitors. It's so easy. And I kind of smile and go, we have a different kind of competition. We have to go around and explain to someone why they would want it at all because they have no idea what we're selling them. It's like, what is this strange liquid, and so we were, so you always have those challenges, right? It's like you either have competition where everybody knows it, but they got lots of choices, or nobody wants you because they don't even consider it a choice.
Now in Vermont and Montana are the two most saturated, the most breweries per capita states in the United States. And so, partly because Vermont's population is so small, there's a lot of breweries here, a very small population, thankfully a lot of tourism that helps that. And then of course the Vermont exports beer all over the Northeast, and it's all nice and tight there.
Vermont has a strong entrepreneurial, like small entrepreneurial kind of a tradition, I think, where people really do believe they have a chance no matter what it is.
Sure.
If it's good, I think I got a chance with this. And Vermonters are extremely supportive. It's that's the first thing I noticed was when you start something new up, they are with you right away. They want you to succeed, and they're like trying to support you a bit and talk to you about it. So as opposed to, say, when I was in Missouri, the show me state, they're suspicious.
Yeah.
Not sure about that.
No, and in Missouri is such an Anheuser-Busch state too, that like everything beer just seems to, like, they're the center, the gravitational pull of that company in Missouri is absolutely outrageous. So anyway, I want to get to talking more about beer. Before we do that, streamline efficiency with Omega Yeast's diacetyl knockout series. The DKO series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. The strains you know now better, available now for made-to-order pitchables at any volume. Contact Omega Yeast today at omegayeast.com. Also, ABS Commercial has been a full-service brewery outfitter for over 10 years. They're proud to offer brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country, as well as equipment for distilling, cider making, wine making, and more. They know the ins and outs of the brewing and installation process and can design the perfect setup for you, whether you're just starting out or looking to expand. Contact them today at sales@abs-commercial.com to discuss your customized brewery needs. ABS Commercial, we are brewers. And if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Hosted by Sydney Jones, head distiller for Few Spirits in Chicago, and Molly Troop, master distiller for Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon. This podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes and give it a listen. So, Bill, you built Switchback on the idea of Switchback Ale, a craft beer for those people who didn't identify as craft beer drinkers. What else? What were other core tenets of the Switchback philosophy as you got started? And we'll eventually trace this arc to smoked beer and dive in there too.
Well, so my background was in quality assurance, and so quality was number one. And I told my business partner, I said, if you make me be a business owner, I'll do it, but you're going to have to let me run this the way a brewmaster wants to run it. And so it's always about the beer, and we grew slower if we needed to, or whatever needed to happen to make sure that the beer was right there. And one of the things I did was I knew that I could make the beer and get the beer to the public at the quality standard I wanted if I stayed in draft only. And we ultimately ended up being draft only for 10 years. And because I didn't want to buy a bottling line in the early days, including staffing it and everything else, that was what I could afford, but not necessarily to the standards that I wanted. And so that was a true dream for me that came true in that, when we did buy our bottling line, interestingly enough, and now we have a canning line, but, I was very proud of the fact that, it had Crohn's filling heads, as good as the world knows, doing its job. And we felt like we were really, again, giving the public our beer as beautiful as we could. And so always sticking to that. And I'm really proud of my whole crew as well, because we've had times where, everybody's had these times where we don't have enough beer and people are screaming at us and stuff. And I realized one day that no one that has come up with me and the crew ever even considered the idea that some of the beer in the tanks we could pull out early. It never even got brought up because it's just not part of what we do. It's like, nope. So we do what we do and always fight for that. So, and then we moved into that to number one is beer and number two is the staff. And so like when we started, one of the reasons we picked bottling lines, because we could see that canning was starting to become a thing. And I said, now would be the time we could just jump into it. But at that time, we couldn't get a canning line that had good enough specs on it that wasn't way faster than we could handle. But a bottling line, we could run 22-ounce bottles at 80 a minute and hand pack and everything else without a problem. And so that was a big decision for us. And we
still get the DO numbers that you needed out of it.
Get these killer good DO numbers, so low that the manufacturers thought there was something wrong.
Really?
Yeah, because how
low is low? I love the brewer Instagrams of showing the DO meters or TPO numbers from the beer.
Yeah, we have inline DO meters on the beer coming in, so it enters the filler at about 5 or 6 parts per billion. Yeah, and
great. And
then we try to keep that pickup to stay below 20.
Yeah,
But part of that was, and we knew that after 10 years there was going to be a huge demand, and so we went with the 22-ounce bottle to try to tamp down demand. And it didn't actually work that well, but
to reduce the demand.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It was.
If we put it in bombers, fewer people will want to buy our beer. Okay. That's one way to do it, Bill.
But it worked, and it helped us learn, because we had never done anything except draft beer, so it helped us learn how the equipment worked and everything and stuff. So it made it more graceful. But again, to me, it was easier on the employees and better for the beer to kind of take it a little slower,
sure,
and not go crazy. And so we've kind of stuck with that, all that kind of stuff, and kind of going along with what you're saying is I think you can kind of see my mentality with the smoked beers in that we were just, so under the gun to produce our flagship, because it had become so popular that we didn't get to like branch out that much. And looking around going, just like I did in the beginning of what all the other people were producing, because part of what I was saying is, these are really good beers. If I make another beer that's just kind of the same style that's good, it's like that. I don't feel like I'm adding enough to the landscape, to the beer landscape. What else can I do? And it was kind of the same thing. I was like, wow, IPAs are through the roof. Sour beers are picking up, and I love sour beers. But it's like, can we make a statement that? And then all of a sudden, smoked beers came along. And I was like, nobody likes smoked beers, but they should.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and I just
find the least consumer interest in packaging format and beer style, and then just lean into it.
Exactly.
That's the Switchback way. Okay.
Yeah, and it just happened that one of the things that I did when I was with Boulevard, we went out to pick up a used kegging line, and we're taken to this little brewery in a town called Launau. It's a little farming town. And they've got a small brewery there, and just a fantastic beer where it's literally a Keller beer. They're in the side of a little hill there, and where they do their their open fermentation is in the cave,
Right.
you know, and stuff. And I just absolutely loved it. And got introduced to it. And so then when I went out to buy our used keg line from Germany, I had a few extra days left, and I went and found that brewery, and I was sitting in their beer garden, drinking their beer, and it was just as good as I remembered. And I thought to myself, if anybody can stick with me as an employee and put up with me for 10 years, I think that the 10-year reward is going to be a trip here. And so that's what we do is you get a trip you get a all expenses paid trip to Germany, and your only requirement there, you can do whatever you want and enjoy yourself, but you have to go to Rupbrau in Launau and have beer there. And it just happened when Gretchen, who was my oldest, longest term employee, had gone. I threw the smoked beer idea out to her. She had gone to Bamberg, and her eyes just lit up. And she said, yeah, they had a party for me every night while I was there. She accidentally showed up, and every brewery was sponsoring a party each night she was there. and she said the funny thing about it was, smoked beer was like a new thing for her. And she said after, those several days of being there, when she moved on, she found that she was missing the smoke. It's like, where is it? When she was drinking just normal beer. And so she was all in, and, we're going to plant our flag and, declare ourselves the world's, bastion of smoked beer.
That's awesome. We got to Bamberg last year, and I did a podcast with Matthias Trum of Schlenkerla, where we talked about Bamberg brewing history and smoked beer. And it's wonderful to be there, where it's just beer. It's just the normal. It's just the normal beer. And obviously there are breweries that make beer that isn't smoked there in Bamberg, and there are beer. There's Weirman is there making smoked malt. You've got Spezial, and you've got Schlenkerla making traditional Rauch beer, smoked beer. But it's just, people just drink it. It's not, they don't consider it different or strange or in any way, this kind of niche, which is just awesome and cool to see it and, out there. But also fun to find something, that you knew you're going to have to build slowly, but also gives you a nice runway, because it's not going to become a runaway hit. You can kind of walk through it and get better at it and iterate slowly, so that you get more and more comfortable with it, rather than having to, just sprint out of the gate. So it's interesting to think about it from that business perspective.
And as you can see, we make quite a bit of it, and it moves. But again, this was another one of those fun things where I was at Savor, and we had these 3 smoked beers, and a beer writer, I don't remember who it was, but he came up and was interviewing me a little bit about it, and he said, "So, are you finding that these beers are getting popular? Are they doing well?" And I said, "Oh no, nobody likes them." and he just stopped for a second and looked up at me, and he just smiled and started writing. I said, "But the folks that come to our tap room, where we can introduce them to it," I said, "over 50% of them walk out of our door with smoked beer under their arm." It's like, but we have to introduce it to them. And I go, and that hasn't translated necessarily to the marketplace in general, but it does really well inside of our tap room when we can show them, all this variety and what we're doing with it.
And I hate using that word education as if somehow creating more quote unquote educated consumers makes them become that. But I think in that sense, it's not just education, it's experience, and that you have that experience. You have that experience of smoked beer in Bamberg, and it sticks with you. And then you remember this beautiful city and these beautiful old places that you've had this beer, and you remember what it's like to drink it there. And all those memories come back every time you taste that beer again. And so you have this experience where someone is sharing it with you, but creating the right context for it, and not apologizing for it, and not leaving you wondering, well, what the hell is this? And instead you have this experience, and now you have a connection with it. And that experience, something that comes back every time you taste it, because the power of those associations, taste and memory, are so strong, and they work so tightly together.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how you brew smoked beer. Before we do that, this episode is sponsored by Yakima Chief Hops. Yakima Chief Hops launched Varieties Supply Company, their own brand of hop apparel inspired by hop varieties, art, and community. Shop designs from various artists inspired by your favorite varieties, including Citra, Simcoe, Sabro, and Mosaic. Shop Varieties, that's VARIETEES, and use promo code CBB20 for 20% off at varieties.com. Also, if you're opening or expanding a brewery, getting your building right is one of the most important things you'll ever do. The architects at OPA Design Studio are your partners in developing the unique design you need. With over a decade of experience designing breweries, the folks at OPA are here to serve as your trusted experts from start to finish with their full range of architectural services. Visit designopa.com to set up your no obligation introductory consultation today. So, Bill, you decided to make smoked beer the slow way. Where'd you start? And let's talk about how that has evolved and how you have expanded both technique wise, style wise, and whatnot. What was your first foray, and what did you learn from brewing it?
So, and you see that we've got the Bamberg Style Oktoberfest, which is a new name because we're terrible with names. So we originally just called it Smoked Märzen and decided that we might make it a little perkier for people so they understood what they were drinking. Since once again, most people, a lot of our customers had no idea what a Märzen was in the first place, and now it's smoked. What's going on? But that's the one we started with, and so very traditional, kind of along the lines of the Schlenkerlei. You can see you're pouring it, and you can see the color.
It has that deep brown color with a little reddish hint to it.
Yep. Took cues for the recipe from Weyermann had written an article about them, and I took cues as to how they were doing it, because I probably would not have made it this dark.
Yeah. From
my impression of what a Märzen should be, but their impression of what a Märzen should be is pretty heady there, and so this was the first one.
And it is still see-through. It really is more like, I'm picking up the darkness from these copper kettles over here, copper-clad kettles on either side of you. But it is a deep amber, kind of color that is see-through eventually, but still pretty dark.
Yeah, and then unfiltered. That's from being lagered for a really long time. Yeah. So, but
you guys and your hazy lagers up here in Vermont, man.
Exactly. And so, very naturally moved from that.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that one. So, you build, you're working off of some of the Weyermann guidelines for it. I imagine because this is using Weyermann smoked malt that there's a significant chunk of base malt in this, and then smoked malt is layered on top of it. How did you guys build a grist bill for this?
So, again, using some of their cues for, is like the caramel malts and stuff, and how intense they like those. The smoked part of it was more guesswork and talking to some other brewers and just about how intense we thought it should be. And so this, we created the smokeometer. The smokeometer. Okay. Yeah. To give people a hint as to how worried they would have to be and how big of a hit was going to be. So
if we have IBUs, and ABV, we've got all these other metrics for understanding how beers are going to, taste, right? The smokeometer. Okay.
So I was pretty good about that, but in terms of what it stands for is
do you measure phenolic character of it?
That's what I was going to say. To me, it was very straight. Someone's like, how do we know? And I just looked at it, and the Oktoberfest what does it say? It says it's 62% smoked malt. So it's got a smokeometer reading of 62.
Okay. And
that became
percentage of smoked malt is the smokeometer. Okay.
We did have to. We already talked about Katie's Love Poem, because Katie's is 100% smoked, but it doesn't taste 100%.
Right.
We're doing it we're judging it based on our own impressions.
Sure.
It's gonna read like this on the smokeometer. So
a sensory smokeometer rather than a metric based smokeometer.
Yeah, and that right now. So interestingly enough, for me, is we've got so much more we can do with smoke. I haven't gotten into different wood smokes and stuff like apple wood and things yet, because I've worked more with smoking up different beer styles. And that's been my big punch, and not ready for just to, I feel like I need my public to be with me a little more so that they can appreciate the nuances of the smoke. So I can say, oh, this has been smoked, on pecans or something, something. And can you taste that difference? Right now, I think that would go flat for everybody. So that's kind of where we're at and the grodziskie is 100% oak smoked wheat,
Right.
And the oak just compared to the beechwood smoking is so much more mellow.
Sure.
So to me that beer. So you were talking about Bomberg a second ago and drinking it's just beer. For me, when we were just drinking the Cadies, I no longer taste it as smoky either. I drink so much smoked beer, it's like that's not smoky anymore. It's just enjoyable.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And one of the things that every brewer of smoked beer, talks to me about is the non-linearity of smoked malt. That that I think is probably what you ran into with the smokeometer, right? That it's not like 100% smoked malt tastes, 50% more smoked than 50% smoked malt. You hit a threshold there at some point where it doesn't get, you saturate as much smoke flavor as you can in there, and more doesn't necessarily, you will or won't use it for other reasons, but it's not just for, that smoked character. You may mix other malts in again to build more depth, to build more sweetness, to just to perform a little bit better, even through the mashing process. But it's not going to be there just sheerly for smoke character.
Right. And that's definitely my my inspiration almost immediately was I call it being an American craft brewer's treatment of smoke, which is, I don't want to follow rules. And why are we not putting smoke in other things? And so and we don't have one of these here, but the very next beer after the two traditional beers, which was a Helles after the Märzen, was another one of my kind of things. It's not a style. And we called it Blackstrap because I based it on Kansas City barbecue. Sweet and smoke. Yeah. And so it's a little bit of a brown ale-y sweetness with the smoke coming in. And it's been a huge hit. But again, it's not definable, but it really draws the smoke averse people in when they're like, I don't think I'm going to like this. And then they get it and they go, oh, but I do like this. And that was my point. And I know a lot of folks talk to us about our smoked beers. Like, I've had one before and it tasted like an ashtray and I didn't like it. And it's like, well, we're treating smoke like a chef would treat, an herb or something. It's like, what balance makes it fit in this just right kind of thing. So you see, I'm jumping all around here, but you'll see our IPA is called Smoke 40. That's because we made Smoke 80, and 80 was 80% smoked malt. And I kind of liked it, but we thought, hey, I think we overshot on that one. And we all voted that the Smoke 40 was at the right level. But that's the idea is what is adding to it, what's adding to the complexity and making it a better beer, as opposed to, and some folks, some smoke beer folks do, I think, have an issue with this to some degree because they're wanting to drink smoke. Right. Yeah. And
it's almost like that certain fan of American wild ales that wants the most acidic thing that they can get because they just want it to blow the top of their head off. Where now most beer makers have decided, sheer acid content is not what we're going for here. We're striving for more balance and drinkability, delicateness and beauty, refinement. And, there is still that fan of those wild ales that doesn't want to go there. That just wants, to melt the tooth enamel. And, they're not as good beers, objectively speaking.
Right.
That refinement and balance certainly makes for more interesting, more delicate and beautiful beers. But
I take full ownership of this up for myself. Americans, we like it bigger.
Sure,
always like it bigger. And I'm horrible. Like when I'm just cooking, it's like I'm always over seasoning stuff because I just like, no, there should be more.
I mean, it's a standard chef strategy, right? What's the difference between food you cook at home and food you eat out? Well, there's a whole lot more salt in the food that you eat at any kitchen. They use a whole lot more butter, a whole lot more fat, a whole lot more, like it's just a lot more and more. And so it tastes more intense and vivid. And you find these bigger contours and this higher contrast. And, and so, yeah, it is what it is. We get all of those things. I'm curious about this as I drink this, this kind of Märzen style Rauch beer. There's a, pretty hefty chocolate character in it, and you can get a lot of that chocolate, but there's also a pretty firm hoppiness to it. And those hops do come through in it. Maybe, there's an Americanness to it that also, that I enjoy because I don't think, and I shouldn't say Americanness because there are also plenty of German versions that are hoppier.
I'm with you.
There's not a monocultural idea of what these kinds of things, but, but it's interesting to see both of those in this. How do you go about building malt through this?
Part of what we're doing is we do use, our equipment is set up for, as sophisticated, well, we can't do decoctions, but otherwise as sophisticated of a malt profile as you want. And for the German beers in particular, we usually go through a really extensive mashing process to try to pull the proteins and break them down so they carry through into the final flavor and augment it and stuff and give you both body, but almost more importantly, the flavor that I think you can derive so that it doesn't leave you in the break. If you can get it broken down into small enough pieces, it carries on into the finished beer. And
the step mash for flavor, not just for attenuation.
Yeah.
Huh.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So that was
Are there specific steps you find that do that with some of these interesting specialty malts?
The way that seems to work for us, and this isn't my invention. This is me, reading up on stuff, but is we'll come in low and very, very thick to let the proteinases work away at it and dig into the proteins. And then when we come up, we go thin and go much thinner, and it protects them and allows them to carry through. And I picked up on it for where they're discussing how can like a German with one malt create so many different flavors. And that was one of the, and I was looking at some of these techniques they use and stuff. And we landed on that one as really enjoying the body that it carries through and the complexity that we're picking up on. And and again, there's some the caramel and stuff that I'm always fond of. I think that's one of my weaknesses.
Caramel.
Yeah. that's in this, it's all German malts in it because it just seemed like it should be, but
yeah. And so you mentioned 62% smoked malt in this, and it's Bamberg or Weyermann smoked malt.
Yeah. Beechwood smoked malt.
Beechwood smoked. And what do you use for base malt with this? Just two-row, Pilsner?
Now you're catching me. I didn't look at my recipe recently, but
that's okay.
Whether it's a two, it's either two. It's one of the two.
Sure,
I'm just not sure which one it is.
That's fair. Little caramel. Anything else that you find adds a nice little extra in the middle there?
For flavor wise, I don't think so. We've got some acid malt in there as well, but otherwise, that's the bulk of it.
Let's go back and talk a little bit more about Katie's Love Poem. That as a grodziskie, very low ABV beer.
Yeah.
Very, very light. Like you said, 100%, smoked wheat malt. Also Weyermann smoked wheat, right?
Yep.
Talk to me about how you go about, because this is a under 4% beer, as yours is in the mid threes range. Building that kind of feel and body in that beer that is so light and so low ABV, that can also still handle, that it is a lighter smoked character, but it is definitely, a smoked character that's there. That poses some fun challenges for you. And of course, making 100% wheat beer also, creates some fun challenges in a brew house. Talk to me a little bit about that.
I think the biggest challenge in the brew house was just the fact that we had no husks to work with. So
Right.
we brought in rice hulls to handle that. And I'm always curious because I'm wondering what the Polish did.
Sure.
I'm not sure what they were doing,
They
but
didn't have a lot of holes to.
yeah. So I don't think they're big rice growers there. So, but actually carried this one through pretty simply. But like you said, looking for a high attenuation.
Do you remember where this finishes?
I do not.
Oh,
I apologize.
Okay. No, that's okay. I'm putting you on the spot here.
I believe it's low ones.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty bright, and and that we skip the any kind of mash off to let it carry through so that it attenuates more, and just a hint of hops in it, which is just traditional. So it's almost unimportant, but it's and kind of like you say, it's so light. I think there's a big reflection there of, for us, almost more so is our fermentation, which is being carried out just a little bit low in temperature to keep it clean, and it's with but it is our standard proprietary at this point yeast. So this is a fun story for you, and I think this is a good beer to discuss it with, because it is, we're talking just one grain, a small amount of hops, and nothing to hide. And,
Right.
and that's why when we won the medal, I talked to the crew and I said, a beer like this, you guys all have to look at each other and realize they're looking for defects, and they gave you gold because they couldn't find any defects. And so brewers, cellarmen, packagers, means you nailed it, because there's nothing to hide from. And our yeast doesn't have anything to hide from. And so this is a fun story. I'm not sure how many other folks in the world are doing this, but the yeast that is in there has been being repitched since 2002. I bought the lab sample in 2002 to start the brewery, and we are still rolling on it with repitches. We have a big program for quality, and we set it down every year just in case there's an emergency, but we haven't had one. and we've even brought in, the lab stuff and done a test brew just to see how much it's changed. And of course it's probably house flavor, but we always vote on our own. It's like, no, we want to go with it, because it has definitely morphed over the years. But it does a beautiful job. And it's one of those things, I think, as a brewer, we know that yeast, and we can get that neutrality and stuff that we need from it for these light styles, and it does a great job for
Now,
us.
I know you're going to be protective of it, but what is there a general family that it's in?
Oh no, I'll tell you, it's WLP 001.
Oh, okay. Well, there we are. Okay. So maybe you weren't as protective of it, but that from 2002, that is just,
Yeah.
now you're on generation whatever.
Oh yeah, I forget how many thousands we're on, but and so actually White Labs did look at it. This was quite a few years ago, and declared it. They said it's not the same yeast anymore. So they let us name it. We named it Brave Little Strain, and that's for folks that don't know Vermont. Calvin Coolidge once described Vermont as a brave little state. And one of our, we did one of those things, online, said, anybody got good ideas? And someone came up with Brave Little Strain. Yeah, but I'm not sure how many breweries anywhere are being that stubborn.
How do you maintain that kind of health, vitality, and kind of controlled evolution? Because it's evolving, and you want it. If it evolves slowly and in a managed way, and is still evolving in a way that's giving you favorable and pleasant, fermentation, but also, accurate fermentation behavior, as well as, attractive flavor from that fermentation. You have to be treating it really, really well. To carry it through that many generations. How do you handle yeast in order to do that?
So much of it is it's about selection, and as we draw down, and pulling out, and I think that's one of the things I kind of object to when I'm reading about yeast getting old. It's like, our yeast isn't old. We're harvesting the new generations primarily, and so learning how to pull on your harvest, you do want some old because it flocks real nice, but the younger stuff tends to want to stay in solution more, and getting that mixture of there so that
the old ones that want to settle down and the young ones just want to party.
They do. Yeah. You don't want, right away, if you pulled and you're getting old generation stuff, it quits too early. It wants to quit, and you don't finish quite as well as you did.
Sure.
But if you go too young, it never settles out, and it's and you can tell that it's just like it's just looking for sugar, like, give me something, man. but it is so the harvest there where we go down and at this point it's visual and everything for us, as we can see when we're in that period where we want it to be,
right,
and to carry it on and to let those carry through. We will notice if anything lags or something, we'll make a point of pulling down and making sure that we're getting some newer growth there, that maybe we've made a mistake a little bit on a pull. So, but it's and I would say, as far as how it's morphing through, you could feel it in the early days. It's kind of locked into our brewery at this point. We don't notice big changes like we did, I think, in the early days, where you could see it maturing and just kind of getting into its zone of where it wants to be. And I, in my imagination, that's what, like, my brewery in Launau is like, with their inside their cave and stuff, is that yeast is where it wants to be, and it's just kind of hanging out.
It finds its stasis within the environment, within its parameters that you subject it to.
Exactly.
Now, I imagine there's still some beers where when you push it really, really hard, you don't want to ask more of it, and you kind of end of line some of that yeast, and then go the other direction. But but that's really interesting. And I did hear that, like, the folks at Grimm in Brooklyn have started with a London Ale 3 strain, and they're now on 250 plus generations deep on that. And so now it's their own yeast. It's certainly evolved in that kind of way, and it's still producing beer and the flavors and the hay stability. Now they're going to great lengths to keep the head pressure really low to top crop and make sure they're pulling healthy yeast off of that in order to to kind of keep that whole thing going. But it's interesting to see that it's not, there are lots of enterprising brewers, yourselves included, who are finding ways to kind of build that character that becomes them, and it's nice to attract that and connect it to it.
I think of it as, I think yeast is just incredibly hardy, and anybody that thinks something's difficult to work with or finicky, it's like, I call it, you have to have a conversation. And when we brought our lager yeast in, I know we rejected one lager yeast, and I think it was the Augustiner. We didn't get good results and rejected it, and moved on to kind of the classic 3470. But I went back to the Augustiner because I knew that yeast, and I spent a couple of years having a conversation with it, and just like, I would like you to do this, and it was like, I don't want to do that, and we came to an agreement. We eventually came to an agreement where it's like, we know what conditions it appreciates, and it's giving us what we appreciate. But it was like, really kind of just like, what, do you need more oxygen? Do you not like that temperature? What is your problem? Because you're being stubborn. And and of course with lagers, it's like such a long-term thing, because you're just waiting, for us, like, you're waiting 6 weeks to even be able to try something else different. It's like, okay, that worked like this. What adjustment can I make to see if I can make that happier? And so we have a real convoluted fermentation schedule for it, but now we're locked into it, and it's just happy as can be.
That's interesting. There's less command and control and much more dialogue involved.
I think so.
That's interesting. Well, let's before we finish up here, I want to talk about some of the other smoked beers that you make. Obviously, you've got smoked Helles here, but talk to me about smoked saison.
Yeah,
that's a especially fun one, where you are layering in the saison style that fewer and fewer people want to drink today, with smoked beer and doubling down on beer that no one will buy from you. So.
Exactly. Yeah. but I actually think this is a good example of what I was talking about as far as balancing. So this has got a combination of beechwood and oak smoked malts in it, and this saison itself is finished with pink peppercorn and orange zest. But this is a great example where that smoke is meant to just accent the traditional saison with a little more complexity. It's not meant to read as a crazy smoked beer.
Right. And there's already a phenolic component to a lot of saison yeast, anything that's POF positive, which is, most of the good ones.
Interestingly enough, this is the beer that, visiting brewmasters are most attracted to. I swear, all of our things, that's the one that they'll bring up later. Goes, I really like that one.
Well, there is that fruity character to it, then especially then that pink peppercorn, which isn't just a phenolic character, but it also has and coriander.
It's got a little bit whatever French saison means. It's that's it's supposed to be a French saison yeast that they're giving us. I'm not sure, if there's a distinction between that and a Belgian saison or not.
There's the line is. That's a whole nother can of worms. We'll stay out of that one today. Well, how much, in terms of how you use smoke malt in this, talk to me about how you did that.
Well, this one in terms of ingredient or recipe writing was all about, in this case, brewing up the saison without smoked malt in it, and then reading that to how intense do we want this to be, right? And how can we bring it to that? And experimenting with that a little bit. And it looks like we came up with like just a 30% tweak here to get it, because I again, didn't want it to be a strange smoked beer that has some saison characteristics. We wanted to maintain it. I think a whole lot of people could drink this, and if we don't tell them it's smoked, they'll just think it's just interesting.
I 100% agree with you on that.
Yeah. And that's what I was going for as far as that goes. And some of this too is, and of course, I should have brought my recipes with me, because you're asking me questions I didn't know I was going to be asked, because this one's got everything you could think of for a saison. It's got all that stuff going on it. But as far as this is the smoked malt goes, you can see in this case, I wanted it to be delicate, and that's where the oak smoked malt came in. And of course it's wheat, it's oak smoked wheat, but which is great for saison, that's a saison,
sure.
So substituting, so there's where I'm looking at it and saying, I've got this saison recipe that has malted wheat, malted barley, but I'm going to sub some smoked barley malt and some smoked wheat malt into here, and how much do I want to do of these things? And so for this, because I wanted it delicate, I pushed hard on the oak smoked wheat, but it didn't give me as much smoke as I wanted. I thought I needed a little bit of that stronger beechwood, so we put a little bit of that in, but it's subdued. Interesting.
No, it works nicely. And again, there's this, especially that fruitiness of the coriander, just soft. I mean, it almost has a candy element to it.
Yeah.
Where all of the smoke character and the phenolic character is necessary to kind of pull it back together.
Yeah. And like I said, it's almost not right to call them smoked beer. I mean, they are smoked, but it's like, no, we're just adding some flavor.
Sure.
Yeah, we're just adding some flavor. I had a really nice conversation with Herr Weierman, because you saw the Hellas Bent, which is our first beer was called Gates of Hellas. So our first Hellas was Gates of Hellas, and it was 25% smoked malt, and Hellas Bent is 50%. And that was because everybody started getting so used to the mild one. But I was introducing him to the Gates, and I said, it's really delicate. And he just was all over. He goes, no. You don't have to taste the smoke for it to increase. There's vanilla. He just started naming all these things that's bringing to it in the background that makes it better. And I'm like, yes. Because we've talked about our Gates of Hellas is when we release it of maybe not declaring the smoke on it, because it drinks, for us anyway at this point, as just a more interesting lager. It's like, this is a lager, but there's something going on there that's really interesting.
If we tell them too much, then they build an expectation for it. That's such an interesting effect when we see the way that brewers write descriptions of beers, that you're coaching your consumer through all of that. You are conditioning their experience of it, for better or for worse. And if you tell them this is going to be a hard thing that you're going to have to struggle through, then you're just setting them up to have that same experience versus just try this. And maybe you're going to get these flavors and this flavor and this flavor. And then let them decide if that's what they like or they don't like.
Yeah.
There's something interesting to that. Well, certainly in this slow roll of smoked beers, you've learned some things. What would you say are some of the biggest takeaways that you've learned? Things that maybe you've now don't do, that you tried and that didn't work, some dead ends, or just some learning experiences that feed into this?
Smoke and hops don't like each other.
That's fair. That's fair.
And I feel I feel a personal badge of honor that we came up with an IPA concoction that works. But I had to it's not made like a traditional IPA at all.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and
that's
actually
intriguing. Can I ask you about what is it?
You can, because I've helped out some other brewers that wanted to do one, and said what the big thing is the aroma, smoke and hops together. I worked through it over and over again, just doing different versions of them, and I'm like, they were terrible. It was just terrible, and I was like, it just doesn't mix. And so what I came up with was that I went after hop flavor and stayed away from hop aroma, and let the smoke be the aroma, but had huge hop flavor. So using like the Mosaic really strong, some of those hops that really express themselves on your palate. And so that
using them more hot side during the boil rather than late whirlpool or dry hop addition.
Exactly. So that it doesn't carry through too much in the aroma, so the smoke can stand out. And then the smoked beer person is like, I get it, it's smoked, but then the flavor is just all saying this is an IPA. Listen, this nice big fruity IPA that you really enjoy. And it became surprise, it's become one of our favorites for the public. And the IPA drinkers are funny because they'll come in and they'll say, what IPAs do you have? And you're like, we got these other 8 beers that are really interesting. Nope, not interested. But give them a smoked IPA and they're happy as can be. It's like,
you're turning them into smoked beer fans and they don't even know it.
We're going to sneak into it. But that would be my thing. Like I said, is for me, that was a huge realization of there's so much wonderful palate flavor that hops are bringing us, like especially the newer hops and stuff that you can play with that and stuff. The other thing that when I tell other brewers about it is what is interesting is actually I've become less concerned about the smoke level. And usually when if someone's asking about it and they say, what do you think of this recipe? It's like, you need more smoked malt. And, cause you're not going to notice it here. And you definitely can tell one lesson that for me, our stouts and stuff, the smoke and the natural roast character, they just blend together.
Sure.
So seamlessly that it may, I'll joke. I think the smoked oyster stout I've got here is smokeometer is like 70%. And I tell everybody, I go, it's because I can't get any more smoked malt into it. Because I have to put roasted malt in for color.
Sure,
I got to do all these things, and I don't have any more room. And but it doesn't drink like it doesn't drink like an ashtray at all. Like it just drinks like a stout. It's a beautiful stout. So, yeah, we didn't get into some of the fun things that we do with those. The oysters are delivered straight from the bay in Massachusetts. They pick them up in the morning, and then we drop them in the kettle in the afternoon.
Oh,
It's
man.
like fun, and we get a wonderful lunch of poached oysters. Stout poached oysters is a big deal.
Fun to be in the brew house that day. Sure. Well, let's pull out and think about big picture here, Bill. You've been at it for more than 2 decades now. This is decade number 3 for Switchback. You've been in beer for even longer than that. What do you hope to achieve next? Obviously, craft beer right now is, for some it's stumbling. It's maybe not growing like it used to. Maybe it's declining a little bit. It's still single digit declines. It's not anything like what we've seen in terms of challenge in the business, as you mentioned, in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it seems like some of that fresh energy is maturing, and we've hit some plateau. At the same time, the amount of knowledge from consumers is as high as it's ever been. The amount of engagement from from serious craft beer fans is still very high, and there's still a lot of interest in people doing interesting things. And there are folks that, I equate it to like thinking about coffee. Once you've had good coffee, you don't go back to convenience store coffee.
Right.
Like, craft beer is in the same spot. Like, it would take a world war or something, or prohibition. And these are the kinds of major events you see where people step back from more quality and more flavor to less. Like, they're not going there. From your perspective here at Switchback, what are you hoping to do next? What do you hope for in the next 5 years?
Wow. Retirement?
Sure.
And
Will you ever really be able to do that then?
No.
Yeah.
I've let everybody know that even if I say I retire, I want an office with a couch in it so that I can take. So I'm going to be 80 years old, and I'm going to take naps, and then I'm going to come out and just cause trouble. And but yeah.
I mean, look at Ken Grossman. He's come back out of to become CEO or interim. You can't really. Once you're in it this deep, it's hard to take your hands off of it.
Yeah, this is a separate subject, but in my dreams is like I'm not doing operations, but I'm traveling the world, and I get an idea for a beer, and then I have the permission to just waltz in and start saying, I've got an idea, and we're going to make something here, and that would be my dream of my late life. But it is a tough market out there. I would say that, we have been pretty fortunate in that because, it's funny that the original Switchback Ale, because it's not a style, there's just not a competitor for it. So we're doing rather well because there's not really a substitution for it, and people do like that character. And so I always kind of go there in that direction. But I think that's, to me, we hear it from Bart Watson all the time, and it's like, be more creative or something. You need to be, it's like, well, man, we've done so much. What else can we do? But I think that is where everybody's got to go is, and for me personally, and for Switchback, it's going to be about, we didn't pursue, say, hard seltzers and stuff. And because nobody in the brewery was inspired by hard seltzers. And I said, then we're not going to do it if we don't have an inspiration. But I think there's room in there to look at where the public is and where the opportunities are, and go after your take on it. And again, that comes back to me of, I think if you present a brand new flavor characteristic that nobody wants. If it's good, they just don't know they wanted it. And that to me is that's to me the true craft person. The craft person, I actually say this on tours. I go to my definition of the craft brewer is or any craftsman, whether they're making furniture or whatever, is somebody who makes something that pleases themselves and then kind of presents it and says, anybody else think this is good? Because I'd like to sell it if you do. And so I always like to have that heart. And so, I've got my Morgan, she's developing beer flavors for us now. She's the one in the brewery that most likes to do that. And she works with our head brewer, Tony. But I just encouraging going, it doesn't have to be something I like. I'm becoming an old man and you've got a young palate. And if you've got something that I look at funny, but you love it, if you love it, someone else is going to love it too. And whether any of that can translate, because the hard part here is going into the market forces. And I talk about this all the time about our other breweries, ourselves, the amount of really good beers I've seen out there that have gone nowhere because the current market just eats them up and throws them by the wayside and moves on to the next one. And they never get that chance to really catch on for someone to realize just how good and unique and wonderful it was. I think that's the big chore that we're trying to solve right now with our beer releases. It's like, I'm tired of releasing something that I know is really good and everybody grabs it for that one keg and then says, now what do you got? Like, how can we get to that level where the public can realize that this thing is worth drinking all the time, kind of deal. And I think everybody needs needs some of that, right? And so for us, we're opening we are very fortunate that we're in this big factory building that used to make ham and hot dogs, but it's got a chunk of land next to us, and it's got an old 1906 brick building that the offices were in, and we're turning that. We bought the building 2 years ago, and the tenants that were here are now gone, and we're building a restaurant over there with a big lawn for events and stuff so that people can come to us, because I'm convinced that if I can get people in, I'm going to get to serve them more smoked beers and I'm going to start, keep that trend going where they're going to walk away.
Tell the story directly to them themselves. Sure.
Absolutely. And, obviously everybody knows that's the bright spot for craft brewing right now, is that folks still like to come to visit us and to see what we're doing. And we're very excited about that. This is kind of, like you say, the next 5 years for, when I tell Morgan, if we get this baby going, we'll get you a little, 2-3 barrel system, and you just pop them out for us and we'll sell them on site, and that'll be your job. And her eyes just light up with the idea that she just gets to keep inventing beer constantly. So, and I think the public loves that, clearly. So,
and then over time, you end up building the kind of place that people want to keep coming back to, just like that little Keller brewery in Germany that you get attached to. And you build your own version of that right here in your own backyard.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, Bill, I think that's a great place to bring this to a close. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. Take your operations to the next level with ProBrew. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Diacetyl Knockout series is comprised of 8 familiar yeast strains engineered to knock out the formation of diacetyl before it starts. ABS Commercial are proud to offer brewhouses, tanks, keg washers, and preventative maintenance parts to brewers across the country. If you're a distiller or curious about it, check out the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. For hop-inspired, artist-designed apparel, shop Varieties and use CVB20 for 20% off. And the architects at OPA Design Studio are your partners in developing the unique design you need. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button, become a subscriber, and support our mission to bring you the best brewing content anywhere. Bill, if people want to learn more about Switchback and this broad, expansive range of smoked beers that you make, as well as all the other things you also brew here. Those less important beers that also, pay all the bills.
They do pay all the bills. Yes,
Sure. Where do they find you?
SwitchbackVT.com.
Cool. And out there on the Instagrams and everything else. And then right out here on the edges of Burlington, Vermont.
Yeah. In the new special Little Brooklyn, they call it. It's
Brooklyn.
It's a hot little spot in South Burlington. It's not. That's the trouble. Is there's a town of South Burlington, but we are the south part of Burlington.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you are, like many breweries, I guess, part of the gentrification of the south end of Burlington, and creating Little Brooklyn here in Burlington sounds dangerous and scary to me. But good luck with that. It is what it is. Really appreciate you talking about smoked beer with me. Cheers.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.